So I think I've actually sort of missed the boat on when tier lists were popular, but this is like the best way that I can think of to organize my thoughts for today's topic. So in today's video, we are talking about generic back row removal. Back row removal can be played regardless of which archetype you're playing. Some of them are going to be a little bit more specific, as I'll talk about, but these are cards that can be played in multiple decks regardless of specific archetypes. That means we're not going to include jamming waves or afterburners or Salamangreat FOXY. Those cards very clearly can only be used in a Skyscraper deck or in a Salamangreat deck, where these cards can be used in a variety of different strategies. And I'm also going to say this is only about cards that I think are good right now. I took cards that I looked back and I said, okay, which cards have topped like in the past 6 months, the past year? So some of these are a little bit outdated. We can't have a list of only good cards. That wouldn't be very fun for the tier list purposes. But we're talking about cards that actually have seen competitive success relatively recently in the last couple formats. I'm doing this because when we tried making a list, we did try on livestream, if you guys were there, we tried making a list of like the best back row removal cards of all time, but it gets kind of tricky because how do you evaluate a card like Breaker the Magical Warrior, for example? I mean, that card used to be banned. It used to be really, really good. It's back row removal, but it's not really good anymore, and it's at 3 copies per deck. Where would it go on the list? And if you're putting it like really far down on the list because you're saying, well, the card isn't good right now, well, how do you evaluate things like HARPIE'S Feather Duster or Heavy Storm? They're not even in the game, so where would I put them on the list? You know, obviously they're really good, but they're banned. It makes for like a really complicated situation. So we're talking about cards that are good this format. How do I feel about these cards this format heading into 2020? Because I know it might seem like we've been playing this sort of format for a while. You know, the last ban list didn't change too much. It just made Skystriker Orcus like a new thing. And I know it feels like the format's almost over even, but it's really not. You know, we have about at least a month of this format left, or like 3 weeks or whatever, and then that might not even be a ban list like right at January 13th. So we're not really entirely sure how long this format is going to last, but these are all cards that you can use if you're going to regionals, because there's still a ton of regionals over the next couple weeks. My categories are pretty straightforward, but we'll kind of talk about them before we start putting cards on the list. So the top category is a staple. I feel like this is seen play in like almost all the different decks out there. It's really versatile, really, really popular. And then we have popular, which is a card that is good, is being played a lot, but isn't quite staple status to where every single person is playing it, or almost every single person is playing it, but it's still out there. A lot of people play it. We have good but specific. Those are going to be cards, and I'm sure you can always start to guess where I'm going to put some of these cards, but good but specific would be like cards that are good, like they're really, really good in some scenarios, but they're only played in like a very specific situation or specific strategy. They're not quite so specific where they're archetype cards, but they are pretty darn specific, or more specific than the other cards, but still pretty decent in this format. Then we have unpopular cards, which, as it describes, is just cards that, you know, have been good in the past, maybe right now aren't seeing so much play, but a little bit of play, not a lot of play, but a really, really tiny amount of play. Maybe unpopular cards, you'd be like cards that saw like a couple tops over the past like 6 months, but not much more than that. We have the MAC category, which is cards that just aren't very good. Keep in mind here, we've put cards on this list that have been topping for the past year, but if a card hasn't topped like within the last like 6 months more than like 1 or 2 times, it's going to fall into that MAC category. I have all the cards in like a random order on the bottom here, so we'll just go one by one. First off, we have ERADICATOR Epidemic Virus. So a very powerful card, you know, it can wipe out all spells or all trap cards. Oh, I also should mention that all these cards directly remove back row cards or spells and traps from the field or the hand. The only one that doesn't do that is Evenly Matched, but I feel that that card is like so clearly designed to be good against back row decks. It certainly has other applications, but I think when most people think of Evenly Matched, they think of back row decks, so that's the only one that doesn't specifically only remove back row cards. That's why Knightmare Unicorn, for example, isn't on this list. Anyway, ERADICATOR Epidemic Virus, I think as most of you guys can sort of guess here, is good but specific. So technically this is not an archetype card. You can play it in other decks. I've even seen it in Orcus decks, not really playing it right now, but the deck where you really expect to see ERADICATOR is going to be Thunder Dragons. They play it for Sky Strikers, they play it for trap decks. It is a very powerful card in that deck. You just tribute your Thunder Dragon Colossus and wipe out all of your opponent's spells or traps, whichever is good enough for the matchup. It could be used in other decks as well. You know, there are like generic rank 4 Xyz monsters that you can tribute for this card. You have some Link monsters you can tribute for this card, but in general, we think of it in Thunder Dragons, although it could see play outside of that. Like I said, it has seen play in Orcus. I think even a couple Dinosaur deck lists have played this card just because you can tribute the whatever Overtext card, I believe, falls into this category. So you can tribute a couple things, but in general, we're thinking of Thunder Dragons, so it's a good card, but very specific, so it's going to fall into that category. Next up, we have Unending Nightmare. So this card, I think, really rose to popularity, was at its peak popularity when Mystic Mine had just come out, because you could play Unending Nightmare, and if you just drew that one card and it resolved face up, you could pop every single copy of Mystic Mine your opponent had, which made it really valuable in that matchup, but it's good against other decks too. You know, you have decks like True Draco out there that have a lot of continuous spells, a lot of sort of floodgate cards, but also Dragonic Diagram. It's just a good card against slower decks that have a lot of face-up cards, even pretty good against Altergeist for that matter. Right now though, not really seeing any play, so we're going to put that in the mech category. It could rise to popularity later in the future. It is still a very solid card, but right now it's just a little bit too slow and not enough applications against the top strategies. Even Mystic Mine isn't being played, like not only just as like a deck, but also just as a card, isn't seeing as much play as it has in the past. Next up we have Galaxy Cyclone. So this card is pretty valuable in certain matchups because it can actually pop 2 cards just for 1 card in your hand. It's a little bit slow, kind of like Unending Nightmare. Recently we haven't really seen this card played too much, so I'm going to put it in the mech category. I still think the card is very strong, but right now, you know, when everyone's playing Orcus and no one's really playing Mystic Mine, not very good. You can see both these cards were pretty good against Mystic Mine, whereas that card isn't very popular right now as people aren't really playing it. Then we have Typhoon, which I believe is the thumbnail because I love this card's artwork, but Typhoon is a card that actually was really popular like a couple formats ago, specifically because you could hit things like Multi-Roll, you could hit Pendulum Skills, you could hit Mystic Mine, all those crazy cards, and I think that this card actually has seen more success and more recently than either of the last 2 cards we talked about, so I'm going to put it in the unpopular strategy. You probably shouldn't play this card right now. It's not super strong, but I think some people are still playing it in their side decks. It has some unique applications against Floodgates out there and some other cool cards. Like I said, Multi-Roll and Pendulum Monsters, hitting those when you go second as a hand trap is really, really strong. Not seeing a ton of play right now, but I think people are still experimenting with this card, and it is like on the cuff of being competitive. I mean, it is competitive, but on the cuff of being like competitively relevant right now. So I'll put it in the unpopular category, not the mech category, because I feel it has more potential to be valuable than those other 2 cards. Next up, we have Cosmic Cyclone. Now, if I made this list like 1 format ago, I would have put it in the staple category, but I want to make a call here and say I've looked through the list of recent events, and I don't think this card is a staple anymore. I think it is just very, very popular. You know, when I'm thinking of a staple card, I'm thinking, okay, if someone is playing backrow removal, this is the backrow removal they're playing. And while that was true a format ago or 2 formats ago for Cosmic Cyclone, I went through those lists from the recent YCSs, the recent regional qualifiers, and I'm just not seeing it. It still is all over the place, don't get me wrong, but it's not the most popular quick play spell card removal. That's sort of a spoiler there, but this card is very, very good. Don't get me wrong, it is very popular. We're putting it in almost the highest category, but I don't think it is quite that staple status that it was like 1 or 2 formats ago, so I'm going to put it in that popular category, not that staple category. Next up, we have Heavy Storm Duster, a very effective card that blows up 2 back row for no cost to you, except that it's a trap card, and that does mean that it is only good in a few sort of decks, and I feel that it's good enough to be in the good but specific category, but not good enough to be even in the popular category, because the only decks that can really take advantage of Heavy Storm Duster are basically like Frogs, Altergeist, and Guru Control, and those decks, they're out there, they're rogue strategies, they're tier 2 decks or whatever, but they're not so popular that this card can even be in the popular category. Not even all of those decks play this card. The only deck that of those 3 that this card is even like a true staple in is like Frogs and Altergeist. Guru Control sometimes doesn't actually play it, but it is a very powerful card in those slower strategies that can take advantage of those trap cards. You see, you know, in Altergeist you can multi-faker off of it, in Frogs you can trigger all your Paleos off of it, so it's a really good card, but only good in those slower trap decks. Next up we have Hey Trunade, everyone's favorite name, and this card pretty much only saw success in the Gren Maju deck that won that YCS, and that was a very huge success for this card, but unfortunately 1 win with 1 card doesn't make it super popular. So I'm going to put this card in the unpopular category. I don't think it's fair to put this card in the mech category. No, it's not topping that much right at this moment, but I think Gren Maju decks are still experimenting with this card. They're still around there, and it is pretty good against backrow decks for sort of just bouncing everything to the hand, just OTKing. It is sort of popular enough to make it into that category instead of just the mech category, because I think in that 1 deck, but still, see, like you can see the difference here is that even in Gren Maju, Hey Trunade is not a staple pick. It really isn't. It is in some of them, but not all of them, so it's not even going to make it into the good but specific category, because I really feel like not even all of the decks that all versions of the deck that play this card actually are even playing it, but it is seeing enough experimentation to make it an unpopular category, just sort of like Typhoon as well. Next we have Mystical Space Typhoon, and you might not know it, but this card actually has seen sort of some recent play in Striker decks. Striker likes this card because not only is it cool back row removal, sort of like Cosmic Cyclone, but also because you can use it on your own cards. You can use it on your field spell to summon Ray from the deck. You can pop your face down Metal Flow Fusion, puts a spell card in the graveyard, puts 2 spell cards in the graveyard in a lot of cases, so it actually is seen play in some pure Striker decks. decks. It does see enough play to be in the unpopular category, which I know I said a couple times here, but this really is like the category for cards that are seeing play from some players right now, but not the vast majority of players, but enough play where it's actually like making it on the list, where the mech cards really haven't seen any play for like the last couple months. They saw play like 6 or 9 months ago, not like right now. And then we have Red Reboot, you know, the bane of my existence as an Altergeist player, and yeah, this card isn't quite a staple. You know, if you go back to Pasadena deck list, which was a little while ago now, a few weeks ago, the format wasn't quite as developed. You saw a lot of people using Red Reboot, but right at this moment, especially the past couple weeks, you know, it's just not there. It's just not a staple card anymore, so we're going to put it in the popular category because this card is all over the place. And I think when you are not playing the Orcus decks, I think a lot of like rogue decks want to play Red Reboot, especially decks that can like OTK the opponent. But when I was looking at the list from like YCS Milan, the last couple of regionals over the past couple weeks, you know, I wasn't seeing as much Red Reboot as I was initially expecting. You know, people have to put so many different cards in a side deck. Oftentimes they only have space for like one form of strict back removal, and in a lot of cases people aren't choosing Red Reboot because while Red Reboot is very powerful against back row decks, it actually is kind of weak if you draw it later into the game, where there's actually like another card that we're going to talk about that is good if you draw it like in your first hand or your second draw, your third draw, your fifth turn or whatever. Red Reboot's only really good on that first turn when you can just OTK your opponent before they get a chance to set up any face-up floodgates or face-up cards like Protocol or Spoofing, anything along those lines. Obviously the card is very strong though, and if you're expecting a lot of back row decks like Altergeist, like Guru Control, like True Draco, and you are playing a very aggressive deck, Red Reboot absolutely is the way to go. Next up we have Evenly Matched, and yeah, this card's really good. Not quite staple status though, so we're going to put it in that popular category. And the thing about Evenly Matched is that yes, it is mostly used for back row decks, but it can also be used against some other decks out there. But I think when people really are thinking of Evenly Matched, they're thinking of it being good against back row decks. Right now though, it actually does have a lot of strengths against like Orcus, and even like the combo decks don't always end on a way to negate a trap card, so it's really good right now. But I think a lot of people, not all people, but if you're playing a deck that really wants that battle phase, that Evenly Matched sometimes can be a liability. You know, you can brick on them because you want to attack, but you want to get the Evenly Matched value, because Evenly Matched, more so than even Red Reboot, I mean, the value goes down exponentially after turn 1. If you even have like 1 or 2 cards on the field, the card just loses almost all of its value entirely. So it's a very popular card, but not quite a staple card. You know, if you go and look at those deck lists, not every single player is playing Evenly Matched. It is not quite that popular, and especially in the decks that want to just OTK their opponent, they're going to play Red Reboot over Evenly Matched. Evenly Matched is more for like value decks. You know, you see in a lot of the slower decks, they can just wipe out the entire field and sort of set up their own game plan. The decks that like are just trying to OTK, they're not going to play Evenly Matched. They're going to play Red Reboot or another card we're going to talk about in a second. Next up, we have Knightmare Phoenix, and without a doubt, this is a staple choice for basically every single deck out there. You know, you see it in like all the aggressive decks, all the mid-range decks, all the control decks. Every single person on the planet pretty much is playing Knightmare Phoenix. Even the decks that don't use their extra deck, like hardly ever, like Altergeist. You know, Altergeist almost entirely just use their extra deck for Link Kribo and Hextia and Prime Banshee and All Mirage, just those 4 cards, you know, to get their combos going. But even they tend to play one copy of Knightmare Phoenix. It truly is like the most popular extra deck monster right now by a long shot. Every single, like, even like the rogue decks are playing this card. Almost every single extra deck right now has at least 1 copy of Phoenix, even with Mermaid Ban. I mean, maybe it was more popular back then, but it seems like right now every single person is playing this card. So it is truly that true staple status, which hopefully you can kind of see here the difference now that we put one staple card up there, what the difference is between like a staple and a popular choice. You don't see in every single slide deck Cosmic Cyclone and Red Reboot and Evenly Matched, whereas Knightmare Phoenix, you will see that 1 copy in every single deck out there that's topping, or at least like 95% of them. Next up, we have Twin Twisters, the card I've alluded to many times in this video, and this really is like the staple back row removal. If you go through and you look at all those deck lists, which I know I've said a couple times now, so I apologize, but really, this is like the card that the most amount of people are playing, and man, is it versatile. You know, you can use it against pendulum skills, you can use it against spells that are face up or face down, traps that are face up or face down. It's not only good against like these strict back row decks, but just decks in general. That discard is actually huge a lot of the time, you know, putting those Orcus cards in the grave, discarding a danger monster, triggering its effect. Twin Twisters really is like by far, if you're going to play just one form of back row removal, you're not playing like an aggressive deck, or even if you are playing an aggressive deck that maybe you don't want to play the Red Reboot because you're more afraid of floodgates than you are just drawing that reboot and sort of blowing them out of the water on turn 1, Twin Twisters really is the card that you want. If you only have space for like a 3 of back row removal card, Twin Twisters by far is the most versatile card in every situation. rotation. It's a card that covers the widest sort of margin of matchups, so it's no surprise that that really is the most staple piece of back row removal. Once again, hopefully by putting Twin Twisters up there, and you can kind of see here the difference between that staple category and the popular category. Twin Twisters is being played in almost every single side deck, where sometimes they play Reboot, sometimes they play Evenly Match, sometimes they play Cosmic Cyclone, but if they're going to play one of those 4 cards, it almost every single time is going to be Twin Twisters, at least for this format. Next up, we have Tornado Dragon, and yeah, this card is good, but it's only being played in Lunaloy Orcus, not even all those lists, but it is, most of those lists do play Tornado Dragon. It's played more than like Diamond Direwolf or another sort of comparable thing that pops back row, but Tornado Dragon is good. You know, even in that deck, you can use it aggressively to pop your own scales and trigger the Tiger effect, but it is a pretty cool card to end on. You know, that deck really wants to end on a rank 4 like Abyss Dweller, but if you're playing against like a back row deck, the Abyss Dweller oftentimes doesn't do that much, so you want to end on something that's actually impactful, and oftentimes for players that is Tornado Dragon. It's a very good card, but only really played in that Lunaloy Orcus deck, so I'll put it in that good but specific category. Lastly, we have Topologic Trisbania, and this one's kind of tricky because it is mostly just played in Orcus decks, but I feel like a lot of decks that are playing IP Masquerena actually are playing this card, and in the past it's been played in decks. I mean, it has seen competitive success even before IP came out. You know, for the past like year or so, you'll see it pop up in different decks from time to time. I remember playing it in BA. That was a really common choice in that deck because you could summon a BA monster to where it points you and the BA automatically destroys itself so it doesn't get banished. Pretty cool stuff there, but right now I'll put it in the good but specific category. You know, we mostly see this card in Orcus, but Orcus is everywhere, so if you're playing in a tournament, you really have to be sort of looking out for this card. I know as an Altergeist player, this is one of the scariest cards to sort of go against. This card made the list, not Zero Boros, because that card banishes the entire field. This one strictly deals with back row, and like I said, I was trying to, for the most part, for all of them except Evenly Match exactly. I just realized we made it like a triangle thing. That's actually hilarious. Trisbania is strictly for back row, so that's why I made it on this list. Anyway though, let me know what you think about my sort of tier list for all these generic back row removal cards. Keep in mind we are only talking about this format, so if something changes, or if you're catching this video like months after it's posted, I'm sure a couple of these will change around their positions, but I think the only one that really probably won't change position is Nightmare Phoenix. That card's probably gonna be a staple for the next like 5 years or something until something crazy good comes out, but for right now, that card is pretty much gonna be included in every single extra deck for a very, very long time. I'll see you later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.